we were to go back then and ask ourselves, what is it in the old office that we need to retain?
That's exactly right. Can I interject a point here?
Yeah.
Susan raised the issue about collaboration and connection, and I want to go back to something that I was trying to draw, and I just didn't state it very clearly, and I think that Susan has said it in a way. If you go back to my three-set diagram,
right.
ABC, okay?
Yeah.
What I was saying is that that intersection of the three sets right in the center, if you can look, let me switch. Come on, machine, swap.
I have my own copy of it right here.
Okay, right. Three sets intersect. That's the issue of collaboration and connection that I was talking about.
These people never met. They went through the entire design charrette without ever being in the same room together.
You know why this is much better than sitting around a table? I could never see Susan's drawing this way if we sat around a table. We had to then have a whiteboard thing. So, I mean, it's, but this is really convenient. And it focuses, you can go across and you can make a really fast scanning. That's what's so effective about it.
Is that it was fascinating to me as how focused all of that is that you just drive right in on the subject and you tend to talk about the subject a great deal more than if you and I were in a room with each other.
Absolutely.
This architectural design event lasted 3 days, with 3 architects located in separate offices. Connected by video and audio, they worked on solving a conceptual design problem. The demonstration was organized to explore the possibilities of using electronic technologies to support design. Bob Stoltz.
As we started this project, the question that we had was, can client and designers work together in a media space successfully the way we've learned to expect that clients and designers work together in traditional settings?
Steve Harrison.
The media has an effect upon the way people perceive and communicate with each other. Could people who don't know each other work together in that setting?
We wanted the architects who worked on this project to be able to deal with the probable needs of the client. We also wanted them to be diverse, to have, to come from different places, to offer different things to the project. And we ended up with architects who really looked and sounded differently, who had different professional experience, and who had very different points of view about what architecture is and about, and it turned out to really see the client's need statement quite differently.
John DeVivier, a principal in a Silicon Valley architectural firm.
A lot of architecture is stagecraft because what you're doing is you're in a pictorial way describing some metaphor that you've created that you think is a solution to this problem. And it might be multiple metaphors. I mean, you might have instances where you think several things are correct. And for me, I have found that the success is when I can describe a really good metaphor for whatever this conceptual statement is.
Susan Haviland, a senior designer for a major San Francisco firm.
Design is a very small part of architecture. Well, I think that design is problem solving, and problem solving without constraints isn't problem solving. I mean, it essentially means there's no problem. Mm-hmm. So that there are always constraints, and there are constraints of all sorts. Now, I don't think architecture is self-expression or even art. I think it's something else.
Lars Lerup, a professor of architecture.
I see my role ultimately, I think, as being a political role. I'm interested in making architecture that's beautiful, yes, no question about that. But I'm also interested in a non-oppressive environment. And I want the environment to tell its own story about itself, its own construction, its own interior. I want it to be sort of fulfill its own dream, so to say.
The clients were John Seeley Brown, Vice President of Advanced Research at Xerox PARC, and his secretary, Carlin Decato. The limitations of their present working environment provided the architectural problem. With the project participants enrolled and the problem identified, the researchers began to focus on building trust between the designers, introducing them to the video medium, and establishing designer-client relations. Traveling to their workplaces, the researchers recorded 3 rounds of interviews with the designers and the client.
We'd wanted to introduce the designers to the staff, to the technology, and also to introduce the work styles of the designers to each other. So we had some prior experience with using videotape to connect people who were temporarily separated together. What we did was we had a little crew, we went around and videotaped the 3 designers and the client in their place of work. We showed the things they were interested in and some of their biases, and we then edited those videotapes down and showed them to the designers and client again. We did this 3 times so that they all had a chance to see and comment on each other. The comments were circulated. That's what made up the later rounds.
Familiarization through video was a new experience for the participants. In most cases, they had not seen themselves on television and reacted with surprise to the recorded image.
I don't say nearly as much as I thought I did. You're a business guy.
During the interview rounds, the designers watched and responded. They revealed their personal architectural biases.
And if you look at
I would have a series of bones to pick with her on this, just that first, that architecture is problem solving, that it's not art, it's only artful, and that it's basically about managing the client by providing them all alternatives. They're all are good. That to me is I understand that, but that to me is not architecture. It's more like very sophisticated building. It has nothing to do with architecture, because I think that for me architecture really has something new about it. It is something that there is no alternative necessarily.
A lot of architects, myself included, feel a little nervous about this kind of political statement. Partly because a lot of times your ideas, when they're actually realized physically, turn out to have effects that are completely different from what you thought. And there were things that are there in the environment, there are things that are part of the traditional ways of putting cities together that have functions and effects that are extremely important that you've overlooked.
This round 1 version of Lars, I watched it 4 times. And it's amazing how every time I watched it, I learned a little more. I mean, he said quite a lot. And I sort of came up with 3 categories for the 3 of us. And it's interesting to me because he sort of talked, in my opinion, about the role of architecture. And I talked about sort of designing architecture. And Susan talked more about the act of producing the architecture.
What's nice about this is that all the players know who they are, and there's, in some way, this is a much more open game than it usually is. Mm-hmm. Because there's something of a rather private nature that's been revealed through this process, so that you can't pull wool over people's eyes in the same way that you might in another situation, which I think is terribly interesting. It might alter the game radically.
The thing that's fascinating to me about these round 1 tapes, and that is that instead of being bothered by the occasional person walking down the hall and the sort of noise of the radio and the lights going on and off and whatever else may be occurring, is that you take your whole consciousness almost and focus it into this one little event, and all of a sudden you do things and see things, and you just react in a way that you would never react in a normal working environment. It's a real interesting thing, and I think it's something that you need to be conscious of as we proceed with this, because it's going to be a different kind of experience. And maybe we shouldn't be, but maybe you didn't want us to be, but it's too late.
At the same time, the research staff proceeded with the internal organization of the design event, which would be set in a media space, an electronically supported workplace.
We originally conceived this project to be just a design charrette. But we said we can't just bring these people in and plop them down in front of all this gear. Cameras, monitors, video discs, computers, videotape machinery, and expect them to have them use the system. So we said, we're going to recruit 3 people to assist the 3 designers, and they'll play the role of being chauffeurs. The chauffeurs were not just to provide a human interface to this gear and keep the project rolling, but they're also themselves designers of interfaces and of underlying technologies. So they would understand the real use the technology was being put to.
The researchers collected images from the designers, including descriptions of the architect's past work, slides, magazine stills, and clips from movies. The researchers added selections from broadcast television. This imagery was transferred to video disc and used for reference later in the design process. A second video disc gave details of the client's requirements. It included excerpts from the 3 interviews with the client, as well as footage of his research domain, statements from the personnel who report to him, and shots of his present office area. In addition, the material was summarized onto a brief videotape that was shown at the start of the charrette.
You know, the image that just flashed through my mind is that this is some set of ruins somewhere, and that the icons that are left in this ruins are all of the components that were originally there, but now, so you have this real surrealistic statement about, here's what's left of the office, you know, all of the
exactly, right. That's a very, I love that, that's a neat notion, because in a way, what we're trying to do is that we try to repair it, and partly by the repairing it means partially to remove some of these walls, you know, that are obviously there and of no use anymore. But
the designer's drawings and several of the video disc images were reproduced as hard copies. The copies were distributed to the architects, who were then able to mark on them. There were 3 records kept of the charrette. An event log was compiled by the research staff in the master control area. A second record consisted of event reports submitted by the chauffeurs at their computer workstations. Each entry identified who was marking the event and when and where the event was occurring. The third record was on videotape, recording the entire designed charrette. Recordings were made of the images that were seen by the participants. A supplemental recording that combined all the images was produced in the master control area. By the end of the first day, the designers were comfortable in the media space.
You know, what I really enjoyed was that I felt that the media space we were operating in was very multidimensional, because it contained all the tapes that we have exchanged, as well as this one. So that, for example, the notion of metaphor that John stressed in his work became a central part of this discussion.
The kinds of limitations inherent in these media can be used to an advantage. For example, in this case of us having to concentrate so hard on working with one another in this particular situation, perhaps we pay more attention to one another than we would if we were all in a room together.
Oh, I think so too. I think there's no question in my mind. I think it's absolutely true. Yeah.
So that in certain situations we're more effective.
You know, there are some things about the technology that are kind of frustrating. And there's this incredible desire I have to draw on his piece of paper. I mean, I'd love to be able to mark over the top of that, and I'm sure he'd love to be able to mark over the top of things that other people have drawn.
Hey, what are you looking for? Here we go.
I'm going to draw over the top.
Try to correct my cow, please.
Is this
Terrible cow.
I can't go, it doesn't show through very well. But what occurs to me is that if you have this component of elements here that
There's the hand in the image of the hand of
is that maybe this element is personalized. You know, and going back to that
Exactly, yes.
discussion that
I read you perfect.
you know, one of the things I love, Lars,
Well, yeah.
is that in our frustration to not be able to point at each other's drawings, we've figured out our own way to do it.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice? Because in a way, it does it quite well, I think, because it's not so hard to manipulate the camera, particularly the ones that are right next to us.
On this second day in the media space, the designers continued with the architectural problem. Their concept was a workplace without the walls found in traditional and open-plan offices. To accommodate changes in the working pattern, people would arrange mobile electronic modules for private and group work.